Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and we have some exciting new keywords for Defiance today, or rather one exciting new keyword, the Amplify keyword, which functions very similar to something called Multi-Kicker from Magic, except it has a better name. Anyways, Awaken the Ages plays a random sigil from your deck depleted and has Amplify 3, play an additional sigil from your deck depleted. Now, what this essentially means is that you can play this card for its normal casting cost, 3, and with 3 power you can get yourself a sigil, or you can pay 6 for it and get an additional sigil, so you can play 2 different sigils, basically doubling up on your secret pages, or you can play it for 9 or 12 or 15 to get up to 5. Basically, you can just continue to pay as much into this card as you would like to get the additional effect as many times as you would like. So if you're playing really high power decks, Mask of Torment, Martial Ironthorn, New Tomorrow, anything where you are getting lots and lots of power, you can get a lot of value out of these cards in a very short period of time. But you can also use this just to continually amplify your cards and make them more useful the longer that you have them in the game. So no matter what, this card is going to be a good 3-drop, it's going to be an okay good 6-drop, it's going to be a good 9-drop, and so on and so forth. Basically, these cards are a lot more modular and a lot more flexible. As a result, they tend to be a little bit less strong. Like, for example, Awaken the Ages is a slow spell compared to Secret Pages, which is a fast spell. But in terms of ramp, that's usually not a thing that's going to worry you too much unless you're playing very heavy spell-based control. So I think this is a pretty powerful card. It has some interesting things going on with it, and we can definitely see how it functions in terms of like other types of setups. So we've also got like Tome of Repetition, which does the same thing at 6, but continues to amplify a little bit more easily if you get a bunch of Tome of Repetitions down. Awaken the Ages has like the sort of infinite potential, which is really strong, and it also functions really well in ramp decks because ramp decks typically already want to just continue to ramp. So if you're looking for a lot of owls and a lot of other nonsense, Awaken the Ages is going to help you out with that. It's also a good synergy card for other Amplify stuff, because basically the more power you have, the more Amplify becomes effective, and the more like ridiculous things that you get to do with it. So let's look at a couple examples of some powerful Amplify cards that have shown up. In addition to that card at common, we have Firemane Lioness. At uncommon, this is a 2/2 for 2, so pretty reasonable basic stat line. With Amplify 2, play a 1/1 Wildcat with charge. Now obviously if you're playing like a tokens-based deck or something that actually has the ability to increase the strength of those units as they come out, this card is a lot more effective. In Praxis tokens, this card can frequently just give you, you know, like 3 1/1 Wildcats on a obelisk, where they basically get the +3/+3 and you swing across for 9 in the face. Like that's the kind of thing that if you're getting into like a post-harsh rule board, you're feeling pretty confident that's going to help you out and give you a lot more to sort of refresh with. You can also use the card more defensively to try and generate just tokens for sacrificing, or just make a bunch of cats for some sort of cat tribal type thing if you want to do like Mask Maker or any other number of odd cat cards. Yeah, you could do some interesting things with that. Overall, the card doesn't look terribly exciting to me in anything but Praxis tokens, but it's fun to see a pretty simple take on Amplify that's going to, you know, just sort of help out on the board and probably not be overall bad. Now, with these Amplifies, most of the times the Amplify is a pretty weak effect, but you do have a reasonably strong card on top of it, and something that you actually want to do. So paying extra here is just something to sink your power into and make your turns a little bit better if you draw a 2-drop on turn 6. That's generally the kind of exciting thing about Amplify, is that you get to just really get consistent games with consistent turns. They're often not particularly powerful at like a particular setup, but the fact that they continue to grow and grow as the game goes on really helps you out if you are top decking these cards and sort of drawing into them later in the game. Okay, so Firemane Lioness is one of our uncommons. We have a second one here, which is our rare, Phoenix Hammer, which is a 4/2 that says when you play your 3rd spell in a turn, you get to draw Phoenix Hammer from your void, and has an Amplify 2 of an additional +1 strength. So the more that you pay for it, the more likely you're going to get something cool out of it. This is obviously like sort of a reference to Worldfire Phoenix, the card that gains strength and also costs the more that you play it. The fact that it comes back from the void is pretty interesting. I'm a little bit down on this card just because the overall stat line of 6 for a 4/2 does not look particularly strong, so unless you're playing very, very deep into lots and lots of power for fire, then Phoenix Hammer is not likely to get back into your hand very often, especially since you have to play a lot of spells to draw Phoenix Hammer from your void. I don't know of any good ways to actually do 3 spells in a turn on a frequent and ridiculous basis. There's plenty of, you know, Cauldron Cradle or Caldarian Cradle type decks that might want to play this card, but overall it looks a little bit underpowered for what it's doing. The Amplify effect is pretty strong, and the ability to actually like get yourself a little bit more damage on your relic weapon combined with recurring it with other effects is kind of interesting. I'm just a little worried that unless you have some way to cheat this card out, it's probably not going to get the Amplify very often, and it's very likely not going to recur so much. I'm not terribly excited about Phoenix Hammer in comparison to the other 2 commons. This one looks like it'd be an okay draft card, but maybe not super good. So we'll see if it does anything interesting or if you can actually do a cool ranked deck with it. Obviously, if you can both trigger the Amplify frequently and play a bunch of spells frequently, Phoenix Hammer has a little bit more utility because it's a relic weapon, which is a type of threat that tends to diversify your board a bit and also make things very, very scary. So you're playing spells, you're playing units, and you're playing weapons. But, like, yeah, overall, this card just doesn't get enough for its Amplify, and the recursion effect is really, really hard to pull off. So we'll see if this gets any play, but I'm guessing that it might actually be consigned to the bin. We'll see. Okay, that leaves 2 others. We'll discuss both of them, but I think probably the most exciting one is the Praxis one. So let's look at the Dragon one, because this is definitely the kind of thing that you want to see with Amplify. This is a weaker card with a much more powerful Amplify. Clutch of Talons. Triple blue for a 4-drop, +2/+2, and flying on a weapon. So that means that it gives whatever unit you put the weapon on flying, which is generally useful in sort of the same sense as Changey Stick. Like, if you have a pretty cheap weapon that actually gives something flying, that can really push a lot of damage across. This goes in the same slot as like Changey Stick and Trickster's Cloak for like just ridiculous draft bombs, but it's also fun and ranked for getting across infiltrates and doing lots of interesting things. Now, the Amplify is play a 5/5 dragon with flying, and it's very, very cheap, so the more that you play it, the more that you get out of it. With Clutch of Talons at 8, you are getting 2 5/5 dragons with flying and buffing some particular unit, which is a little bit better than a Great Parliament in terms of value. Certainly seems fairly strong. The more that you have power, the more dragons you can get. After a decent amount of like power hungry nonsense, you can definitely get yourself into the field where you can just fill your board with 5/5 flying dragons. And 5/5 flying dragons are a pretty good card to have, similar to just 4/4 flying owls, except that they trade a lot better, they do a lot more damage, and they have a much shorter clock. Oftentimes, you can get those dragons to get lethal very, very quickly. This card is triple blue, which is pretty hard to invest in if you're also trying to get like enough power for Amplify. Like, there's not a lot of ramp synergy in blue, so you have to go into other colors, which means you also have to like do some other things. But I can definitely see this going into some Elysian decks, some TJP sort of like owl ramp style decks. There's definitely a lot of options that might make Clutch of Talons look really, really interesting. So seems pretty exciting. Definitely going to make a lot of fun dragons, and that's really cool. It's a Kenna card. You can see Kenna is on the card herself, and also it's got the triple blue and the dragon synergy. You know, very, very strong like sort of Kenna card, and kind of cool things going on with the lore. I like it overall, seems neat, and let's go ahead and talk about the last one because this is probably the most powerful of the batch, Darya, Warrior Poet. Now, Darya has Pledge, so she's a fire or a time on the first turn if you would like to play her as such. And since that is a power that you can use to get yourself towards not only Darya, but Heart of the Vault, Worldbearer Behemoth, a lot of the cards in Praxis have very, very deep influence and power costs, so having a card that actually functions as a power every now and then so that you don't get stuck with like 2 to 3 power in big Praxis is generally very useful. Darya's stat line is not a typical big Praxis line. It is a 3/4, but it has 3 abilities, one of which we have not seen in red or yellow. This is Berserk, Deadly, and, of course, Amplify. Or rather, Pledge as well. So Berserk makes this card attack for 6, pretty frequently. Deadly means that you can't really chump block it with anything that's kind of slow or like wall-like, because obviously if you have like a 0-6 or a 1-4 or a 2-4 or any sort of stat line that just would basically be a bit more defensive, Darya is just going to chew that up and then continue on. So Deadly definitely helps you out, especially if you can give the card Overwhelm, which is fairly common in Praxis and gives you a little bit more of an option. Now the Amplify gives one of your other units Berserk and Deadly. So if you're attacking with a bunch of other units, if you're playing, say, World Bear Behemoth, that's a really, really strong one. Anything with a strong attack trigger really, really likes this because A, it gets to attack without impunity, and B, it gets to attack a second time if your opponent doesn't block it and sacrifice stuff to the Deadly effect. So big stat-lined units actually really, really function well with Deadly in Eternal. Like, basically, if you give a Deadly to a large unit, it becomes very, very hard to do double blocks effectively because Deadly will kill both units and you'll always get an upwards trade. So in sort of Praxis-y mid-range lists, Darya Warrior Poet comes down with a pretty good Amplify on turn 6 and beats out like a lot of really, really good things. I believe there's been some talk about the ideal scenario of Initiative Sands into Aurelian Merchant, into World Bearer Behemoth, into Darya. Like, that's the kind of thing where you just get a ridiculous swing and just do a ton of damage and get a lot of aggression and power out very, very quickly. So Darya's Amplify is probably what makes her most worth it. Like, as a 3-4 Deadly Berserk, I'm actually not sure if that stat line holds up super well as a 4-drop, but this card seems very, very strong overall, and it, you know, does manage to block a lot of scary units at 4, which is very, very good. It's resistant to Torch, it's resistant to Vanquish, it's fairly hard to kill because it's multicolored. Like, this card is definitely a powerhouse, and it's going to be a pretty staple 4-drop in Praxis for basically exactly the World Bear Behemoth and Heart of the Vault synergies that you can get with it. You can also like give things Berserk and Deadly and then recur them, which in the case of Heart of the Vault makes for some very, very exciting Deadly Heart of the Vault shenanigans, and that is just a ton of fun to be doing in red and yellow. So it's really interesting to see Deadly in Fire and Time. That's not a typical place that you would see that particular setup. Like, Time does have a few Deadly units. It's got a lot of like Viper Spites and you know, like some snakes and scorpion wasps and poisonous creatures of various types, but it's really interesting to see it on a sort of bigger unit and also on a lot of bigger units in Fire and Time. This, I think, is something that's a little bit more unique. This looks like a really a difference in the color pie from, say, Magic the Gathering, where you are getting something a little bit different out of it. And yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. Like, overall, this leads to some interesting board states. I'm very excited to see how this card plays overall, but it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and we should get some cool aggressive stuff out of it. Yeah, so this one's probably the most powerful card out of the pledges that or out of the Amplify cards that we've seen so far. Those are the 5 that we have seen, and they all look pretty interesting. The commons and uncommons have some decent strength. That rare Phoenix Hammer looks a little bit underpowered, and then the legendaries clearly have some very, very good, you know, easy niche places where you can just put them in a deck and make that deck happen with like some ridiculous nonsense, and I think that's very, very exciting. So we have a good Praxis Tokens card, a good Praxis Midrange Beaters card, a good TJP ramp card, and another ramp card of some kind that may work in Mask or in New Tomorrow. Lots of actually good things for decks that currently exist right now in the current meta. But we can also see that these cards might lead to very, very different types of decks, and I'm curious to see if they change up the meta at all, because that would be some pretty exciting stuff. Yeah, so that's it for the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll be back with more Eternal stuff tomorrow. I'm off the stream today, so we will just be throwing this out, and then we'll have some more stuff for you on Friday. Looking forward to that. I will also be casting Worlds on Saturday, so feel free to tune in to Twitch if you want to see that. And yeah, once again, thank you all. Have a really good night. Cheers.